Retos 1, Retos speaking.
Capture coming here, capture coming. 1.5 below. Stand by, 2 dives here, boys.
We're looking at 10.5 and 42.
Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us. It's great to have you along for another edition of the podcast. As ever, a huge thank you for all your feedback, especially on the Kenny Reid edition. It turns out he's a pretty popular guy. If you're enjoying the podcast, it's really helpful for us if you subscribe, leave a comment, or hit the rating button. We're hoping to get a little more ambitious with the podcast, and all your interactions help hugely. This month we have another bumper edition, another 2-part podcast. This one with one of the absolute stars of our sport. From the age of just 20, Jimmy Spithill has been helming America's Cup challenges. He's won it twice and is currently one of the key personnel with Cup Challenger of record, Rosa. Jimmy is a massive podcast fan, and from the get-go we've been in touch about getting together. For the last year though, he's been holed up in Sardinia working with Rosa on the development and build of their giant new AC-75 Cup boat. In the end, we jumped on a plane and took the podcast to Jimmy. Now, it's rare to get a long sit-down interview with Jimmy. The time pressures put on him have always been huge. In our experience working with him in the past, he's often arrived a little late, keen to get going, making you very aware of the time pressures, all in his laid-back, amiable Aussie way. But there'd often be a slight feeling of pressure, and we always had a feeling that he rather enjoyed it, keeping us on our toes. This interview was different though. Just him and I, we had plenty of time. It was far too windy in Sardinia to sail, so Jimmy had spent the day out on the water, surfing, foiling, kite surfing. He was pretty relaxed, and it was great to really sit down and talk all things Jimmy Spithill. He has a lot to say, and I really feel gives us a unique glimpse at the man behind the media persona, as well as a peek inside the crazy, intense, secretive world of the America's Cup. As I've said, we've split this pod in two. It's 2 editions, so do give them both a listen. If you've ever wondered what it's like to be 8-1 down and in the dogfight of your life for the oldest trophy in world sport, then this interview is for you. I really hope you enjoy the time I spent with Jimmy Spithill.
There's 2 things you get really good at growing up with red hair. One is running. I said, oh, geez, I'd love to have a go ocean racing. And he just said, what are you doing tomorrow? Even if someone was next to you in those sort of conditions, you wouldn't be able to do anything.
Well, Jimmy, many thanks for sitting down to do the podcast. It's great to be here. We're in Sardinia, of course. It's blowing an absolute gale outside. I've got you straight from the beach, haven't I? You've been surf foiling all day. You know, how has it been? You know, going from one island to another one. You're enjoying island living, I'm guessing.
I have, yeah. The last island, really enjoyed. It was incredible, but it really was a small island. You know, tiny. Where Sardinia is massive, and if you're into the outdoors, it's just an amazing place. To me, it's one of the last kind of natural, wonderlands out there, because, yeah, in the summer it does get quite a bit of cruise ship traffic and quite a few tourists. But to be quite honest, the majority of them seem to kind of stay up near Porto and the eastern side, where the western side of Sardinia is wild. You know, like you're just going down these dirt roads and finding these surf breaks, and you're on these hikes down the mountains and cliffs, and it's just been an amazing place to be able to live and hang out, and it's got the lifestyle that I'm really attracted to. So yeah, I'm really loving it.
Back with Rosa, the Italian team. I mean, you were with them in 2007 for the Challenger Series, of course. I mean, how is it being back with the Italian family?
Yeah, it's funny how, you know, sometimes you can go a little bit full circle and go back and forwards between these campaigns. And to be quite honest, you know, during the campaigns with Oracle, I certainly didn't foresee going back to Rosa or back to Prada. not because I didn't enjoy my time, but honestly, you don't. Generally, I think you don't think too far ahead in this game. You really just think till the end of the campaign, and then you take it from there. It's all result driven. But yeah, it's great. It's great to be back for another shot. I mean, that's really what I wanted, was another shot at, I guess, redemption, really. And for some of the guys involved in the team, it is a much different group than that was involved when I was last with the team. And clearly, it's quite a different boat.
We'll get back to the Cup a bit later, but when you look at the lineup in Luna Rossa, it's properly Italian, apart from you, really. You must have left a good impression last time.
That's for sure. That's a big change. I mean, the previous campaign, we were actually based really in Spain, in Valencia. We weren't based in Italy. And it was a real multinational team. Especially the sailing team was really multinational and across the board. I mean, the shore team, I think, was predominantly Italian, but the design and a lot of the other team, it was an open book. Here, it is an Italian team. On the sailing team, I'm the only non-Italian. The design team is a little bit of a mix, but for the most part, it has a lot of Italian flavour to it. And we're living in Italy, so it's the full experience.
We're obviously going to come back to the Cup in a lot of detail, Jimmy, but it's impossible to cover your whole Cup journey. You've had an absolutely incredible career, haven't you? I mean, I think I'm right in saying this is your 7th Cup campaign, is that right? In 20 years? You're
20
not sure?
years, yeah. I mean, the first one was New Zealand, ironically, and we're going back there, so 20 years later.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the first one was young Australia and New Zealand, so in terms of counting them, probably somewhere around there.
I mean, when you think back, that 20 years in the Cup, I mean, so much in our sport has changed in that time. I mean, it's been an incredible time to have been experiencing, that period of progression.
I mean, what a ride. It's just been an incredible ride because we really started out in what was I don't want to say typical America's Cup, but that was the monohulls, what they were called version 5 boats. And the first one, obviously, we were a young team and we're there with an old boat. But for the next few cycles, it was essentially a very similar class and it was obviously being refined. So to start with that, and go through that cycle and then suddenly just have this massive quantum leap into, the trimaran and that match, these massive feats of engineering. Then the next one we're into the foiling, the cats, Bermuda, and now look at where we are. It's just been an incredible loop to go through. And let's face it, just very lucky to have timed it when I timed it. I mean, just pure luck, really. Which is, in some ways is a little bit of I find that a bit of a problem in our sport, that there is, I'm just going to be honest with you, it really was just good luck a lot of the time, but just knowing someone that gave me an opportunity to be in the game. If it wasn't for Sid Fisher back then, at that time for the first campaign, there's no way I would have been involved in the America's Cup. And so that needs to change.
Better to be lucky than good, then,
Better
Jimmy.
to be lucky than good.
Now, this is in no way a plug, but when it comes to researching my podcast guests, you've been top of the class because a couple of years ago you released a very honest and I got to say a very readable biography, Chasing the Cup. I've got it on the desk here. I mean, as I say, it's in no way a plug, but it is, Jimmy, a proper insight into your life, which I didn't know before I read it. I mean, in our house, we've all read it. I've just been rereading it again this week. How hard was that? Because I guess you're seen as having this sort of hard exterior. I mean, everyone would say that about you, but it is so open, it is so honest, and it's very much in the public domain. I mean, how was that process for you? How tough?
It was really difficult. I mean, as a kid, I loved reading books. I think also that was a case of where we grew up in Pittwater and essentially in the bush, and you couldn't really get television a lot of the time, and so you'd read, and then even as I grew up and started getting, let's say, on the match race circuit, there wasn't iPads or iPhones or any of that sort of stuff. So and on the flights, there was basically just a one TV hanging from the wall that you maybe could see. And so it was really reading. That's what you did to pass the time. And obviously when you start out in the match race circuit, you've just got the worst airline ticket around the world, just travelling forever, stuck, delayed, this and that. So to pass the time, I used to really enjoy reading. And the books I really enjoyed were biographies, of people that had been and done stuff. But the thing I really enjoyed is when they were really honest and really candid. I think like Andre Agassi's I thought was amazing. When I read that, I was like, wow, like I had no idea what was happening and what he was going through. And then I have a bit of a fascination with the military and stuff like that. So reading about some of the guys that are in these real high-level situations. So, yeah, and I don't read as much as I used to because there's so many distractions now. But I love podcasts. I love listening to podcasts. I try and read a book a month. And but the actual process of writing a book was difficult. It was tough.
You were really open in it. I mean, there's a great insight into Jimmy Spithill, particularly, I guess, your early life. I mean, for a while now on the racecourse, Jimmy, you've got that real punchy reputation, a bully in the pre-starts even. And here, you're really open about the fact that as a kid, it was you that was being picked on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, I mean, we have a sort of a running joke, between, Tom Slingsby or anyone with red hair is that, there's two things you get really good at growing up with red hair. One is running for obvious reasons, and then at a certain point, fighting because you just get sick of running. So, yeah, and I think back then it was, I don't know, like if you were different, then it kind of wasn't accepted as much. I think today it's much better in general. But yeah, there was a bit of character building. And look, I think kids can just be tough, can just be cruel. The schoolyard can be a pretty difficult place sometimes. But again, what are you going to do? And so yeah, I received a bit of it, but it was also a learning opportunity because you start to kind of understand what makes a bully. Like they're actually really uncomfortable themselves. They're really not in a great place, and usually there's something going on in the background. So it's just a shame really that it's happening. But ultimately, at a certain point, you've got to decide, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to just continue to sort of take this, or are you just going to say, okay, that's it? Time to bite the bullet. It's time to stand up, and when you do, man, it's an incredible feeling. The weight comes off, and it's an important lesson in life that at some point you have to stand up for yourself.
We filmed you boxing, of course. It's well known and beautifully filmed, I guess, by a lot of crews. Lovely Jimmy Spithill boxing in slow motion. How big a part has that been, and I guess how crucial was that? And I guess someone who's being bullied turning round and changing all of it.
Yeah, well, one of my grandfathers was into it. He used to do it when he was younger, and so he'd always be encouraging. Funny enough, my cousins and I, he'd be buying us like a book on boxing, and both our mothers would be like, no, stop encouraging that, we don't want that. But he was always about, look, boxing's about self-defense and building confidence. And it sort of became more than doing the boxing. It was a relationship I built with a couple of the trainers. And, one of them really became almost like a bit of a second father to me. Like he was just such a lovely man, huge heart. And a lot of the guys that trained in there just came from a bunch of different backgrounds. But he would just give all of his time to all of them. And so he was a guy that everyone would just naturally go to and really sort of open up. And that to me was the powerful thing, the sport and what it did. It could have been anything, who knows? I could have been doing any sport, could have been doing soccer and this and that, but that was a key relationship. And his kind of morals and discipline, that was a huge influence in my life, and I'll just never forget it. There were some key lessons you suddenly realise just you can't judge a book by its cover. Like I just remember one day in the gym, like a couple of guys coming in, and I mean they look like they just probably had just come straight out of jail, you know, full tattoos, big menacing looking guys. You just would not want to see these guys in an alley in a street. And they just want to fight. They want to come in there, and trainer Tony's like, no problem, you know, so grabs this guy, Tom, he comes over, this wiry looking guy wearing glasses, nerdiest looking guy you've ever seen. And I'm thinking, this is an absolute mismatch, you know, this is going to be a bloodbath. We get in there, Tom jumps in, absolutely wipes the floor with these guys, you know, almost had to carry them out. And so again, it was just a classic lesson of don't ever underestimate anyone, and never judge a book by its cover.
You grew up in Pittwater, north of Sydney, and anyone who's been there will know. I mean, it's so glorious for sailing, isn't it? It was such a great spot. You did plenty of sailing there as a kid. I mean, how did you find sailing? And in that environment, perhaps, I guess maybe it was all inevitable.
Yeah, it really was a case of the environment setting the pathway, I think. It was a lot like probably a surfer growing up in Hawaii on the beach. Because the only way to get to school, the only way to get to the mainland where the car was parked was to get in a little tinny. Or for school, there was a little ferry that would go around the bays and Scotland Island as well. But it was just an amazing community because everyone knew everyone. There were just really no rules. I mean, the only rule was basically be home for dinner. And that was from a real young age. So naturally, you'd come home from school and you would either be on the water, in whatever you could find, whether it's a rowing boat, you'd be building rafts out of, you know, cutting down trees in the bush, or you'd actually be up in the bush. That'd be the other option. Or BMXs, building bikes. It was just such a cool way to grow up, and just you were free. You know, there was no authority. It was just an incredible lifestyle, and I think, you know, I've got kids like you now, and it's a shame because it's real difficult to kind of provide that, especially with the technology and a lot of the distractions today. But man, was that just an incredible upbringing. And you were on the water, whether you're on the ferry, what there's a storm, whatever it is, you've got to go to school, you've got to go to the car, got to get food, and you're just spending hours on the water. But the big breakthrough for me was at Christmas, I think at 5 or 6. My dad was into windsurfing at that time, and so I got a windsurfer for Christmas. And that was just like freedom. Like I just remember sitting in school, and I'd just be looking out the window, and I just see the trees sort of moving, and I'm just like, oh, I just can't wait to get home and just get on that windsurfer and go out. And there were a couple other guys, Adam Bishell, who the Bishells lived in the same bay. He was really good, you know, way above my level and older, and I remember always watching him just tearing around and doing jumps and sort of thinking, oh, that's the level I got to do. I got to be like Adam.
You're 5 years old and you're out in a windsurfer.
Yeah.
No life jacket, nothing.
Nah.
I mean, that just wouldn't happen now.
No. Isn't it funny how, you know, you think back how, in a shame, it's a pity that's kind of lost, you know, this over. But I know what it's like because you're a parent and you naturally want to jump in and stop that. But there needs to be a balance. You need to let them go out, you know, within reason, make some mistakes and learn.
It sounds like an idyllic upbringing, but it wasn't one of privilege.
No, I mean, but it didn't really matter because you were just, the people there were so genuine, and it was just any time there was something going on, whether it was a bushfire or some issue, the whole community would just get together and help whoever was in trouble. And I mean, even I remember as a teenager growing up, the first thing we wanted as teenage boys was a tinny with the biggest outboard we could put on it. You know, that was our goal growing up. You know, so the windsurfer, and then the next thing you're just trying to, you know, save some money and get a tinny with a big outboard. But even the water police, you know, for instance. And then when you become a teenager and you start going out, you've got to take the tinny to the mainland and then somehow get to a party or whatever it is, and you've got to get back in it, come home, and you can imagine, you know, but even the water police, we all knew them. They were mates of ours, so they'd just be there helping you, looking after you. And so it was, in that environment, we were rich. You know, it was, we had everything. It was just such an incredible time.
All right, let's go back to sailing. I mean, very quickly you became pretty good at it. What are your early memories of competition? I mean, was the need to win there at a really early age, or did that come later on?
Yeah, my first memory from really racing, well, like I was used to windsurfing, and then there was another kid, an older kid in the bay that was racing a Manly Junior, which is a little bit like a kind of an Optimist. It was boxy, but it had a jib and a spinning gear and 2 people. So he actually asked if I would crew for him. So I went with him, and we did a little bit of training. He lived in the bay, and then we went and did the race on the mainland, and I hated it, like, because I was so used to going fast on the windsurfer and being the one in control, and it was just so much yelling, and the boat was slow, and the whole race, all I'd do was basically bail the water out, and I just remember coming home basically in tears to Dad saying, I don't want to do it anymore, like, it's just, I'd rather go windsurfing. And so he basically said, okay, no problem. And then it changed, you know. Then finally, one day there was a big, what we call a council clean-up in the area, where a barge would come around and all the old bits of junk and fridges or whatever you had would get thrown out. And our neighbour was throwing out an old wooden Manly Junior. And so Dad grabbed it, and then with my sister Katie and I, we basically repaired it, painted it, and then that's what we'd start sailing when we got home from school or on the weekends, and then at a certain point we started to race.
And to win.
Yeah, well the first race, it's a funny story, eh? Like the first race we did, we sailed over there, and I remember it was pretty windy, and Dad just following the little tinny we had. It was a decent sail, so you know, we'd sail over to the mainland, pulled the boat up on the beach, and anyway, and then pretty quickly we pulled this boat up on the beach, and most of the boats were fiberglass, had flash sails, all that sort of stuff, and then you know, a whole bunch of kids came over really and just started kind of ridiculing the boat and just, you know, making fun of it and this and that, to the point that where Katie, my sister, started crying, you know. And so Dad sort of saw this, and he came over and he goes, look, don't worry about that, just, you guys know the boat, you've trained in this a lot, don't worry about what anyone else says, you just get out there and, you know, go sail a race. So, you know, I remember him just drawing the course in the sand, you know, the triangle, the hot dog, and out we went. Anyway, so we raced, did the course, or what I thought was the course, and went to the line and a gun went off. And so, anyway, we sailed back to the beach, pulled the boat up on the beach, and we'd won the race, the first race. And, you know, it was funny, the same group of kids came over, but no one was laughing. You know, they weren't making fun anymore. And that, again, was a good lesson that Dad said, is look, you don't have to worry too much about what anyone else has got. Worry about what you've got. And again, don't underestimate anyone, just get out there. And I think it was just a case of, it was windy that day. I mean, Katie and I used to go out in anything, because that's what we do. I mean, that when we come home. And so, yeah, it was a funny one.
That's a good story. I mean, I've raced against Katie. She's hard as nails. It obviously worked.
Yeah, Katie's good. Katie's really good. And, yeah, I mean, she had to put up with myself and my younger brother. So she's not unused to abuse, that's for sure. But she's, a really good sailor, very, very composed, you know, under pressure. And just a really nice person. You know, definitely a much sort of kinder person than my brother and I.
Like a lot of us as youngsters, you got involved in the match race program. None of us could afford to own a keelboat, but here we could sail other people's. It was brilliant, wasn't it? In short races, intense, and you were naturally good at that. Australian Young Sailor of the Year, and caught the attention of Sid Fisher. You know, how did all that come about?
Well, it got to a certain point, we were sailing dinghies and almost little skiffs in Australia. And then the next step was quite a big step. You know, it was either, like the laser didn't appeal to me. Like I really enjoyed sailing with someone. And I enjoyed kind of, you know, that team dynamic. But with just the cost, you know, was to own a boat, that next step. But at that time, the Royal Prince Alfred Yacht Club and a lot of yacht clubs around the world had this program they called the Youth Development Program. These little sports boats crewed by 3. And it was like $50 to be a junior member, and I was just like, oh, this is awesome. So, and we'd sail every weekend for about 6 months. And then the team that did well would get selected to go and race internationally in some of these youth match racing events. And that's what set it up, you know, and that was the attraction, because we could just sail as much as we wanted. But we'd go against all these other teams that had been training as well, and the cool thing was the boats were equal. I mean, you basically just draw them out of a hat, everyone had the same gear, and it came down to the best team. And
then you met Sid Fisher. I mean, Sid Fisher, he's a big deal in Australia. How did that happen? Yeah, so we're at the Australian Yachting Awards, and you know, I was fortunate enough to win the Junior Sailor Award, and Sid, I think, was there nominated for maybe the Offshore Sailor of the Year, which he won. And anyway, so after the awards, I went up to him and just introduced myself, and I said, "Oh, geez, I'd love to have a go ocean racing." And he just said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" The next day was Saturday, and I'm like, "Nothing." And he goes, "Turn up at 8 o'clock, you know." And so I turned up early, got there, and that was the start. I mean, that was another case of, had that not have happened, who knows, you know, because that's really led to, you know, the sailing for Sid on Ragamuffin, running his boats, meeting people, sailing with Grant Simmer, and you know, these amazing guys on his boat that had so much experience. That really was the pathway to the Cup. You sailed with Sid in the 1998 Sydney Hobart race. I mean, the tragic edition, of course. I mean, that story is a podcast in itself. But as an 18-year-old sailing that iconic race on an iconic boat, you know, with Fisher, when you look back, what was that like? Well, I'd been used to the young guy on the boat. I was clearly the youngest, but driving. And it was just such an awesome team. I mean, these guys, the majority of them have been through like the 79 Fastnet. They've been through all the big ones, won them. And in Australia, the Sydney to Hobart, it's kind of like, it's one of those things you really look to do as a young sailor. You know, it's like even the whole nation kind of stops and watches it. It's a little bit like, you know, the Kentucky Derby, or it's just one of those iconic races in Australia where everyone watches because it's on Boxing Day, straight during the Christmas period. And that one just, you know, and Sid, you know, talking a little bit about Sid is probably one of the toughest guys I've ever met, you know, in terms of being just tough, but also in terms of a hard taskmaster and going to the limit. I mean, just to give you an example, you know, Sid used to play rugby as he was growing up, like first grade rugby. Now, he was banned from rugby for over-vigorous play. Now, I've played rugby myself, and I thought that was the whole point of rugby. You know, it was vigorous play, so you could imagine what he's like. But yeah, he had an incredible team and a great group of people. And yeah, that was my first one, the 98 race. What a year to do it. Yeah, I remember being out there thinking, geez, this really is tough. Now I know what they're talking about. But I mean, the start was beautiful. I remember we got out in good shape, and Sid in his motivational way right before the start, he basically just, "Don't mess this up," you know. And I was like, "Okay, thanks, Sid." And then off we went. We got out well and just screaming down the coast in this beautiful nor'east sea breeze. Picture perfect. And then sure enough, you just see the big cigar cloud coming, and bang, you know, you hit it. And the first night, I was like incredibly seasick. It was set up probably 30, started out 20, 30 knots, the southerly, and just, I mean, it was just like hitting a concrete wall. You're like just 20 foot, just bashing, and that went on. And every weather report you were getting it was just escalating a little bit more than the last weather report. And then at a certain point, the waves sort of got to a size where now I was starting to feel better, because there was no slamming. You were just sort of going up and down these big mountains. And I remember on the watches, we started putting less guys on watch. I mean, because we just had a little storm jib up, and there would just be a guy driving. You'd drive, and then there were two guys just sort of looking for waves, because waves were breaking, and getting through it. And you'd be hearing the noise, you know, it'd just be howling, and you'd just look to the horizon and see these mountains of waves, and it was just incredible. I mean, it was just frightening as well. And then when you got below, you could just hear what was going on the radio. You know, all these boats getting in trouble, people, you know, mayday calls, and so it was even below. You couldn't really sleep because you could hear what was happening,
and you felt for anyone that was in trouble because you just knew yourself. Even if someone was next to you in those sort of conditions, of course you'd do anything you could to help them, but you wouldn't be able to do anything. I mean, it was just survival. You're just really just trying to sort of get through this somewhat of a perfect storm.
18 years old, and how'd you take all that in?
Yeah, well, I just remember thinking, geez, how lucky I am right now to be on this boat with this crew. You know, if you're going to be in a situation like this, you know, like I said, a lot of these guys have been through that 79 Fastnet storm and race, and so I just kept thinking, this is the right boat to be on, and we'll get through this. But certainly at the end, it really started to hit you, because then you got to see the reaction, and it was a real sort of somber mood. And then the reports started coming of, you know, the unfortunate few people have been lost, and yeah, it was a strange experience finishing the race, because it was, in other Hobart races, it's a really kind of euphoric feeling. You know, people cheering, and you get there, everyone's having a beer, and it's just such a feeling of achievement. But with this one, it was more, everyone was just really concerned and down, because a lot of the guys knew some of the guys that unfortunately were lost. Sydney 95 was dead last in the 95 America's Cup, and here we were going to the 2000 Cup. My phone goes off, it's like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'm like, oh no, this ain't going to be good. If we wanted a shot at winning a race, we had to win the start.
And then of course it was Sid Fisher that got the America's Cup career rolling. He had an old cup boat, hired you as the skipper, 19, 20 years old, I mean still the youngest ever. Could you quite believe what was happening then?
Well, I knew Sid was trying to do a cup campaign. He wanted to do a real one, you know, in terms of full noise. And so they were out there trying to raise money, get people behind them, because it was in New Zealand. It was so close to Australia. But he couldn't get the money together. But what was in our favour is he'd paid the deposit for the entry fee. And the only way to get the entry fee back was to turn up for the first race. So Andy had this old boat sitting in this old fishing boatyard, just rusting away, Sydney 95, which in itself was no thoroughbred. You know, Sydney 95 was dead last in the 95 America's Cup, and here we were going to the 2000 Cup, and there was a significant shift in design. Like, this thing was an aircraft carrier, and the 2000 boats were all almost half the width, I think, of this thing. But anyway, we had that going in our favour. There was basically not long to go before the race, and Sid wanted to get the deposit back. Sid was pretty frugal, and so he came up to me and he goes, yeah, all right, what we're going to do is I want you to get a young team together, get Sydney 95 going, we'll get over there and we'll see what happens. And I think he was thinking we'd just do one race, he'd get his deposit and we'd be out of there. But it kind of grew, and so then suddenly I was just thrown into, well, I've got to organise a campaign. So, you know, going out, trying to raise money, you know, just calling yacht clubs, putting the word out there, hey, we're looking for a young team here to go over, race the cup, and instantly, you know, obviously flooded with people wanting to do it. And so then we started doing tryouts on Ragamuffin, and we narrowed it down to a pretty small number. And a big part of being a part of Young Australia then was having secondary skills, because we had to get Sydney 95 somehow back into being able to sail. And so it was just an incredible period, and you know, and we got out, got some sponsors. You know, there was like an airline that was flying to Argentina, but it would stop off on Auckland on the way. So perfect. Okay, we got them. Toshiba, and I think Line 7 as well. Ross Munro sponsored us and kicked some money in, and we got the shipping. So basically, we're off. And we'd sailed Sydney 95 a few times on the harbour. Had a couple of close calls. Almost put it on Shark Island a few times. But we also, the big thing that really helped is we got a couple of experienced guys involved to help us that had sailed the Cup. Rob Brown, who was actually a neighbour of mine and someone I used to look up to because of the 18-foot skiffs that were on TV, got him involved, got a couple of other guys as well, and they were key because they were really able to help lead us in the right direction.
When you look back, I mean, you must just think it was crazy. It's like the frat boat, isn't it? I mean, everyone's sort of 20 years old.
Oh, it was crazy. Like, it was so cool. Like, when we finally... You know, it was just full-on work, you know, guys were just sleeping in the shed, and because the boat was in terrible shape. And So anyway, so then we just can't wait to get to New Zealand. Like, we're just so pumped up. And we've seen, you know, in the news, the boats are all out there training and sailing. They're all in the viaduct and they've got a nice base. And so we're like, oh, it's going to be awesome. We were all thinking, oh, we'll probably be in a hotel right in the action and just be amongst it. And then Sid goes, oh, I found a place for you guys to stay. It's a railway campus. And everyone was just like, oh, no, you know, like it was, you know, at least 20 minutes away from the viaduct, and we're thinking it's like some sort of a caravan park. So anyway, Rob and I turn up there to the railway campus, and we're sitting down, and we're chatting to the lady that ran it, and we're talking away, and then I was sort of saying, hey, what is the sort of population in the railway campus? Like, who do you house in here? And she goes, oh, I've got just mainly full of exchange students, around 19 to 20, and it's about an 80% ratio, 80% female to male. And like, I just couldn't hide the smile on my face, you know, like, and all the guys. So we'd just gone from this, what we thought was like a bad situation, to just landing in this thing of roses. And it was just the best time. Like, the lady that ran it was just such a lovely, kind-hearted person and looked after us. And we all made lifelong friends, you know, with a lot of the people that were staying there. So it was, yeah, it turned out all right.
Things were going well on land. I mean, what about on the water? I mean, quite early on in your career, Jimmy, I mean, you had got a reputation, I guess, as a real aggressor on the racecourse, particularly in the pre-star. I mean, you owned the pre-stars. Even at that America's Cup in '95. I mean, what's your memory, I guess, of how you approached it?
Well, we didn't have a choice because we were slow. You know, we had this old boat that came last in '95, and here we are 5 years on. And a lot of our sails were actually, like, a few of our sails had 3 measurement stamps from 3 America's Cups. So, and the measurer is just like, mate, this is incredible. I've never seen this before. You know, he's just stamping it for the 3rd time. And so a lot of the time we didn't finish the race with the same sail, it'd just rip. But if we wanted a shot at winning a race, we had to win the start. So we just went all out. I mean, just put the hammer down, and we talked about it. As guys, we're just going to do everything we can here. And the boys were up for it. And I remember our first race. I mean, Prada had been there. They'd been saying for years. I mean, double the time of anyone else. And I don't think anyone was really taking us seriously at all. A lot of people questioning whether we should be there. You know, it's going to be dangerous, and this is going to be a joke. And straight off the bat, bang, we're in the lead. Going up the upwind leg, we're crossing ahead, and it was just, for everyone on board, it was just such a exciting time. And but there was definitely the other thing that really comes to memory from that campaign was Peter Blake. Like, he was a big part in certainly helping me just kind of get there. I remember early on when I was because I had no idea how to raise money. And Sid would have guys, he'd bring a guy in to help, and he'd be fired a week later, so you just got this revolving door. And I remember asking Peter Blake once, it was a big business meeting, and he flew over from New Zealand. I said to him, listen, I'm just having a hard time, not really sure what to do, but there's a big meeting happening, I'm just after some advice. And he goes, I'll fly over, I'll talk at the meeting. And I was just like, wow, I couldn't believe it. And he came over, and then again in New Zealand, we didn't have a base. So all the teams have these great bases in that viaduct area, but there was nothing left. We had no money. But I think Rob Brown had found this old barge called the Hikanui. And look, this thing wasn't easy on the eye. You know, it wasn't a beautiful craft, that's for sure. But it had a crane on it, and it was motorised. And it was like some old Navy thing. So Rob had struck some deal, and Grant Guthrie was running the viaduct. And somehow we'd convinced him to at least have a look at it. And so I remember ringing up Peter and saying, listen, we've got the Hikanui coming in. And he knew what it was, so he was sort of laughing. And I go, look, I'm just not sure they're going to let us keep it in the viaduct, because the only spot to park it was in front of this new apartment complex that had gone up. And so anyway, so Brownie and I are waiting there on the viaduct in front of the apartments. And then in she comes in all the glory, and the guy's sort of tooting the horn as he's coming in, and this barge is listing over with this old crane and containers on it, and Guthrie's just like, no, you're not bringing that in here, you know. And we're just like, oh mate, look, it's here. Look, we can't even call the guy. Like, let's at least tie it up and have a chat, you know. So it came in, and again, Peter Blake, helped me out, and somehow he pulled it off that we were allowed to keep this thing in there in front of this apartment building, and people spent all this money. And yeah, so anyway, he was amazing.
That's hilarious. It's not very America's Cup, is it?
Yeah, I'll never forget Guthrie's face when it came through the entrance of the viaduct. It was so good. But once we had tied it up, I'm not even sure if the bloody engine would start again anyway, so it was sort of there. It was a feature.
It was full of drama, wasn't it, that Cup? But it did very much open the door into the America's Cup world. And there's so much to talk about, Jimmy. And as we've said, you've had such a long career. Several in, sailing in Challenger Series up to the 2007 Cup. Then you moved to Oracle under Russell Coote, sailing the giant 90-foot trimaran. I mean, I'll never forget, we came out to San Diego and I came on the boat with you, filmed on board. And it was incredible. I mean, the sport had never seen anything like it. I mean, just describe those initial days sailing that monster of a boat.
Yeah, it was just mind-blowing is the only way to put it. Initially we started up in Anacortes where we built it, and at that time Frank Camas his team were really kind of running it, the project. We had VPLP obviously designed it, and Frank, because of all his experience, and we were all monohull sailors. And so but one thing early on, when we sort of saw the boat for the first time, we were all blown away by the size of it, but it kind of looked like a bit of an offshore boat. Like it kind of looked like Group Armour 3, but to another level. And so straight off the bat, we were sort of thinking, the windage, we need to improve a lot of this windage. We don't need stanchions and all this other stuff. And so pretty quickly, there was like a core group that started to really kind of get involved and take over. And at the same time, Frank was actually, I think, getting ready to do a Jules Verne. A weather window was opening up. So it started out, and without Frank, I'm not sure, we really needed him involved in those early stages to sort of teach us a little about how to do it. But then at a certain point, it was a boat. You adapted, you learned how to sail it, and as we've seen in the sport, good guys always adapt to a different style of boat or a new boat. So by the time we got to San Diego, we were pushing it. I mean, we're still getting our minds blown every day by the thing. But it was a boat, and we were just trying to make it go as fast as possible.
I remember standing, at the back of the boat, you had that tiny little platform, and there would just be Jimmy Spithill, with these sort of space-age glasses, way up in the air. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was such a cool experience. I mean, that time we spent in San Diego was just, it was just incredible. We just go out and just be launching in this thing. And then when we got the wing, I mean, to me, that was such an amazing engineering and construction feat. The fact we even did it, I think, was huge. I mean, that Larry, pulled the trigger and said, yes, okay, do it. It was, I mean, the wing, you just think of it, you can't get under the Golden Gate Bridge with that wing. It was, 230 feet high or whatever. It was just an amazing thing to see. And I'll still never forget the first day when we put it up and they sort of stood it up on the boat, and it was just like, oh, we've made a mistake here. It's too big. Like, what have we done? But then as soon as we got sailing and we learned how to use it, it was just such a weapon.
Such a bold decision to make. I mean, it was, now we've had years, haven't we, of rigid wings and the technology and the systems to run it. But then it was absolutely the first. I mean, what was that process like inside Oracle? I mean, who was brave enough to say, we're doing it?
I think, Mike Drummond was the design coordinator, and he and I actually got along really well. We'd started doing some ACAT sailing and stuff, and we knew it was going to go to a multi-hull. And he'd got in touch with Ben Hall, and he had a hard wing for an A-class. And so Mike organised for Ben to bring it to San Diego, put it in an A-class. I think Mike or I had one there with a soft sail, and we were going to go out and just see how it went. And straight off the bat, you could tell it was like a turbo boost, because like we know, you have these big purchase systems for the soft sails to support the leach. But with the wing, that's all built in. So you've essentially, like a windsurfer, you've just got this one-to-one sheet and this instant power source that you could trim a lot. And it had just way more power, way more, much higher lift coefficient than a soft sail. But, doing it on an ACAT, as opposed to this 100 and whatever it was, 20-foot trimaran, that was something different. But you could see, we knew light air was going to be the weakness for us, that Alinghi were really sort of focusing on more of a light air style boat. And so the only way to really improve the performance was to go to a wing, to do that. And so, I think Mike was key. I mean, look, it's hard to single anyone because it really was a collective team effort. But I remember one day where, before we'd pulled the trigger and Larry had rung and we're talking about the wing and he goes, "Oh, so do you think we should do it?" And I was like, "Yeah, we should do it." And then, anyway, I hung up the phone and I was just like, shit, I hope I'm right. Like that. This is a big call. Anyway, the next day I went into Russ and I'm like, "Hey, did Larry speak to you last night?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I go, "Did he ask you if we should do the wing?" He goes, "Yeah." And we both just had a bit of a laugh. But it was, it was definitely the right call. And as it turned out later on, we actually broke our best rigger we had off Mexico. So it in some ways really, at that point, focused us and the team on the wing.
There was only one decision, and that was the wing. I mean, I went to that cup in Valencia, and I remember every morning coming down to the docks where you kept Oracle. I mean, Oracle stayed in the water, and a team of people sailed it, including Mike Drummond, sailed it at night, and we'd see them come in dry suits, looking absolutely shattered, battered and bruised by the whole experience. It felt so on the edge. It felt like this massive risk.
It was no doubt on the edge. I mean, to do something of that scale, of that size. And it was one thing to do it in San Diego, because San Diego was the perfect place to do it, because there's no wind in the morning, so you can sort of lift, you need two massive hydraulic cranes to lift this thing up. No wind in the morning to lift it up, put it in the boat. And then at the end of the day, the breeze would die down. And where we parked the boat was very, very light near downtown. Valencia was a different story, because we got there and it was winter. And so you just can't take this wing down. It was like we actually damaged it a couple of times. It was such a huge process and the crane drivers all hated it because it wanted to create lift, just wanted to move all the time. And so we had this crew and led by a couple of C-class guys by Magnus. And man, they had some rough nights. Like we sort of had this procedure, like if something went wrong, call this guy, blah, 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 right to the bottom of, okay, get the sailors, call Jimmy and the boys and get them down there if it's really bad. And so I remember one night my phone goes off, it's like 2 or 3 in the morning and it is pumping, like the shutters are just going, and I look at Magnus's name and I'm like, oh no, this ain't gonna be good. And I just said, "Hey mate, how's it going?" And he was just on edge, like he was so agitated and like he was so stressed, like he was really, really worried. And I said, "Mate, we're on our way. It's all going to be good, And so we got down there, and the thing was it was just like a raging bull. Like it was lashed down with all these moorings and trying to hold it back, but it was flying a hull. Like it was just sort of tacking itself, going back and forwards, like aggressively. And we're just all standing there, just in shock, watching this thing. And and it's pitch black. It's in the middle of the light. We've got light shining on it in this commercial port. And anyway, so all right, let's try and get on the boat. And we're all just trying to, but we couldn't get on the boat because we're in these little ribs and everyone was having a go. And you just like this big rudder had come out of the water and then slammed down next to you. And anyway, we eventually got on and we're all just trying to put safety lines and almost trim the wing. It was just a real stressful time. Once we got to Valencia, it was really stressful because of the weather. And it's just, the wing, it just didn't turn off. It's not like it came back and just pulled the sail down and, oh great, it's tied up to the dock. It was just getting on and off the mooring was an ordeal. I remember a couple of times, at that point we had engines powering the boat and we get stuck out in somewhat almost of a storm, offshore, and the engine would break down. And yeah, it was just long, long days because you could never turn off. You always had to be on.
It was worth it though, wasn't it? Your first cup win, 2010. And can you remember how that felt? The little kid from Pittwater, lifting the oldest trophy in world sport.
Yeah, it was incredible. Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget it, crossing the line and all the sort of horns going off and guys just sort of running up the beam and, hugging all the crew guys with Larry and, then Russ jumps on. It was an amazing experience.
There we have it, podcast listeners. We're leaving it there for this episode. Jimmy Spithill, at just 31 years of age, picks up his first America's Cup win, making him the youngest winning skipper ever. His notoriety, though, was forged by what happened next, 3 years later, in the windy waters of San Francisco Bay. And we'll be publishing part 2 in a couple of days, so you don't have long to wait, I promise. And it's gripping. From the development of the AC-72 class, a massive capsize, the advent of foiling, and a fascinating insight into just how Spithill and his team turned an 8-1 deficit into a 9-8 win. It's a compelling tale. Please, as ever, let me know what you think about the podcast. I'm easy to find at Shirley Sale on Instagram and Twitter, or just me on Facebook. And please do remember to like and review on whatever platform you're joining us on. It'd be great to know what you thought of Jimmy's stories. As ever, the podcast is expertly produced by Tim at Vertical Films, so thank you, Tim. It's really important to us that we bring you a high quality listen. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Have fun on the water and sail safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1, Rosa speaking.
Pressure coming here, pressure coming.
1.5 below.
Stand by, 2 dives here, boys.
We're looking at 10.5 to 42. This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.